Hey everyone, welcome back to Inside Gaming. We've got some very, very deep thoughts about Control for you, so buckle up. This might be the thinkiest think piece we've ever thunk.
We've been deep into Control, and surprising no one, we have some thoughts, as Lawrence alluded to, about reality and perception and the manifestations of our deepest and darkest thoughts. Fun stuff.
Yeah, so we'll give you a second to get mentally prepared. So Control is a game that centers heavily on corruption of the incorruptible, or at least the supposedly incorruptible.
Spaces, objects, functions, and people that we'd like to think of as rigidly unwavering.
Reality.
Yeah, exactly. Things that are, and stay are. But Control gets us thinking about whether those things weren't so rigid in the first place.
Ooh, yeah, deep thought. So we're gonna talk today about how that applies to the architecture. Yeah, you didn't see that one coming. And bureaucracy and control, because the two are actually very thoroughly linked.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's awesome. So here's a quick primer for those of you who haven't picked up Control yet, which you should. This is one of those games that you're asked for, like feature-rich single-player games, great story, all that stuff. Buy it, please, for the sake of video games.
Play Control so we can get a Control too.
Yeah, and we can get a second think piece out of it. So you, Jesse Faden, the player, arrive at the government facility called the Federal Bureau of Control. You're in search of your younger brother, who you believe is being held by the Bureau in this very building.
A building that is internally referred to as the oldest house, in case you were worried that this game wasn't at all ominous or foreboding.
Yeah, it turns out the building is in lockdown as it's besieged by an otherworldly force called the Hiss, that is very much affecting the building and the people inside of it.
But then you get a gun that's more than a gun, but it's also still a gun, and you become the director of the Bureau.
Yeah, who said the American dream isn't alive and well?
I certainly didn't.
Straight off the street, became the CEO, just had to watch the old CEO commit suicide. Yeah, so there are other games with similar concepts to Control, but the fact that it takes place in a government building is very important. The Federal Bureau of Control, or just the Bureau as it's referred to, is a monolithic concrete brutalist tower in Manhattan, which by the way, brutalist doesn't mean that it looks brutal, even though it kind of does. We'll get into it in a second. It's a structure that is aggressively monotonous, like every good government building should be.
Right, and brutalist architecture in particular has a lot to say that I think is pretty darn pertinent to Control's whole vibe.
Yeah, so now that we've established everything, we finally get to talk about concrete.
Oh, this is why we made the channel.
Yeah, I told you guys this was gonna be a thinky thunky think piece. One of Control's ever-present themes is what happens when something rigid and inflexible, like the reality you perceive, is corrupted and pushed to its breaking point and turns into a reality that suddenly you have no rules and then your brain snaps because you have nothing to latch onto anymore. It's pretty cool stuff.
Right, the Bureau employees are possessed and changed to do the Hiss's bidding. The organization itself exists to handle paranormal happenings, but buckles under the threat of the Hiss. And of course, there's the building itself.
And you're biting off a pretty dangerous bit there.
I might abandon it.
All of these things have specific functions that are distorted throughout the Control, the game, not the concept. What better material is there to illustrate this than the manipulation of concrete?
I'm so glad you asked. Concrete is generally perceived by the public as ugly, stark, and drab.
It's very unattractive.
It's not very attractive. I think it should be torn down.
But many architects admire the material and, by extension, brutalist architecture.
I think if we could have done it, we would have used concrete to make the light switches.
Yeah, and the sheer amount of concrete in Control is concretable. I feel like there's a wordplay there that I'm hitting. There's a lot of concrete is what we're saying. Nearly every inch of the building's interior is smooth, pristine. It's beautiful industrial concrete, you know, or reflective tile. Thank you, ray tracing.
It doesn't seem flexible, but when shaped and poured with enough planning, it can of course be contorted into any shape, which explains why it's such a darling among architects. But when it hardens, there's not much you can do about it. It's not a material that welcomes change.
It is that, so much that when petitions have been made to demolish hulking concrete structures, the plans haven't been carried out due to the sheer effort and carbon cost required to tear one of these bad boys down.
Which is why Control's treatment of brutalism is so special, because the game's architecture is liable to change well after the cement has been set.
Because of the Hiss. There
yeah,
we go.
See, now I'm already regretting it.
No, you're on the hook for me too.
Okay.
Because of the Hiss outbreak, every room in the hallway in the oldest house can undergo a physical rearrangement, which obviously can't happen with normal concrete.
The game calls them building shifts, and they seem to happen on a scripted basis.
Yeah, it's within the lore, it's pretty funny because it becomes an observable phenomenon, but without any amount of predictability. It's like, did the hallway change? You should let someone know. Yeah, within the world of Control, a building shift is actually pretty easy to miss. At first I thought I'd gotten turned around when in fact the floor plan had changed. Nothing was inherently wrong about the physical space, it just changed. It's different than it was before.
And like we said, Control is interested in what happens when these spaces are pushed to their breaking points. And sure enough, the corruption doesn't stop at the building shifts.
Control points are strategic map locations that act as checkpoints. You unlock them by cleansing the area of the Hiss, and then they function as fast travel, level up points. It's kind of like the bonfire in Dark Souls, what have you.
And before the Hiss, You want one?
Absolutely not.
Are cleared out. Control points are claustrophobic spaces with sharp angles and intrusive blocks of building jutting from every surface.
Yeah.
This is a corrupted control point, and this is the Boston City Hall. Boston City Hall is a poster child for brutalist architecture, with severe edges and concrete jutting out at odd angles. But it strikes a balance between flexibility and its fixed structure.
Yeah, a corrupted control point illustrates that balance being pushed to and beyond its absolute limits. Cleansing the control point will return the area to its natural state, but it shows that when the hiss warp a place, they go off what is already there and iterate on it until it's unrecognizable, unfamiliar, or alien, something that is not an obvious human space anymore.
See, concrete buildings are part of the landscape and can reflect their surroundings more than you might think, because the earth that's used to manufacture concrete will influence the final product, allowing buildings to reflect their surroundings in ways that many buildings are incapable of. The climate, too, will dictate its appearance. The concrete of control reflects the hiss, much like any concrete structure reflects its surroundings. Oh!
See, yeah, we're getting pretty deep into architecture thoughts now. So, where the hiss have taken up residence, the building contorts and closes in. It becomes more like them, or their culture, if you could even say that they have one. One of the cooler parts of Control is you have no idea what the hiss is, or if they even have any amount of sentience or volition of their own, but they do definitely have an effect both on the world and the reality that you see, so it's pretty cool. So, yeah, it's funky and it's weird and difficult to wrap your mind around, and maybe most interesting, sometimes I didn't even realize an area was corrupted until I cleansed it. Maybe that's just video game blinders, but yeah, I would walk into an area and be like, this looks normal, shoot everything, and then it folds back to being a normal, boring government lobby. It's really cool for the game to remind you of that difference all the time.
And this is interesting. I learned from the very good design podcast, 99% Invisible, that it's not only architects that love concrete. The material has been used widely in photography, especially fashion photography, because the smooth, exposed gray surfaces make for an excellent backdrop to a subject without upstaging them. It's an excellent accessory with stark shadows and even colors.
Yeah, I can see that. It diffuses light, it gives you nice gradients if you want. I never ever thought about that until just now. What a great think piece.
Good podcast.
Gives you some thunks.
I mean, good channel that borrows from
Exactly.
podcasts.
Subscribe, like, and subscribe. So the light and color and control plays off the virtual concrete surfaces beautifully. It's the perfect canvas. Level switch seamlessly between strong hues of red, green, yellow, and blue. But its control's actual setting, its basic level design is fairly uniform from what you see, at least when the hiss is not there. It becomes that, very familiar, very boring, somewhat inviting but extremely utilitarian wood, tile, fluorescent lights, and concrete. Whereas, man, when the hiss is there, it's all jacked up and red lights all over the place. Pretty cool stuff. And guess what, motherfuckers? It's also the perfect canvas metaphorically.
Oh, shit!
He's really excited.
Ah!
Told you. You thought we thunk the deepest thork, but we're about to think your thunks down to the thoughts.
Me too. Brutalism became popular in the 50s and 60s, with bold geometric structures popping up everywhere. They were rampant on college campuses given their affordability and simplicity.
Yeah, one of the key design tenets of the style is an exposed inner structure. The building materials are meant to be as visible as much as possible, probably because you don't have a lot of ability to hide them. You can't socket away a pipe inside concrete, because if you ever have to service it, you'll have to blow the wall away. At best, you have drywall in front of concrete, but then, why even use the concrete? You can just use studs.
In sharp contrast are the heavily redacted reports littering many of the halls and offices of the oldest house. The FBC is an incredibly opaque organization that has almost as many secrets as it does thick black markers. There's a smart joke for those of you paying attention, because that's how you redact a report. Brutalist architecture is all about making plain the structures and techniques that were used to create the building. It's a utilitarian art form that wants you to know both what its function is and how that function is achieved.
And now you're starting to think thunk a little ahead of the game maybe, but we'll get there again. But as we see in Control, the clean lines and exposed walls of the oldest house are obscured and covered up by the hiss corruption, withholding the information the building was originally intended to convey.
Lawrence, are you saying that the hiss warping the building itself reflects the way the Bureau conducted its business?
Maybe so.
Huh.
That's a thinkable, isn't it?
I'm thinking.
Plus, concrete and widespread brutalism are products of extreme confidence, which is what you want to convey in a government structure, something that will stand the test of time and is rigid and powerful in what it is, but not aggressively so.
But also in a way that's maybe a little bit too much hubris, because sand is so integral to the creation of cement and concrete is so ubiquitous across the world. Sand is the second most used resource on the planet behind only water, and we're running out of both. Believe it or not. When a lot of these buildings were constructed in the middle of the 20th century, there were little concerns about the astronomical amounts of energy required to heat and cool them. Could you imagine running out of energy?
Oh, silly. Let's get an oil fight. So a line can be directly drawn from the short-sighted hubris of the Bureau, believing they could control forces well outside their grasp, which brings us back to what goes on inside the oldest house's identity. Bureaucracy. So many deep thoughts, you thought it couldn't get more exciting, but now we're about to talk about red tape. Let's get bureaucratic in here! I'm just sipping on an invisible Mai Tai.
And I've got a hat that's made of straw.
So yeah, we're talking the DMV, post office, red tape for miles, forms and subforms. Oh, baby! You missed one check mark and now you're bopped all the way back to start and you gotta fill out an exception paperwork. It's good stuff.
Similar to brutalism, bureaucracy is often very, very intricate, but can also be very, very boring.
Yeah, they're parallels. Likewise, it can also make for a very delicious canvas on which to tell a human story of interest and color. Been thinking about just sprinkling more food related terms where they don't belong. Hope that's okay.
Yeah, we've been encouraging Lawrence to spread his wings verbally, spread his tongue, if you will.
Yeah, my savory, salty tongue.
We come back to pushing against rigidity.
Fighting the forces. You see, we do live in a society.
I'm the Joker, baby!
And according to famed sociologist Max Weber, bureaucracy is the systems and processes used to best organize human activity within that society.
Bit of a mouthful, but basically it's how human beings organize their complicated tasks, is
Yes.
bureaucracy. It just kind of seems that the larger human organization gets, there's sort of a bureaucratic tax you have to pay on operating it. The more complicated a machine gets, the more oil it takes to keep all of its parts moving. Just some basic ideas. So what happens when organizational structures are interrupted, when best practices fail?
Better question, what happens when those best practices were made to deal with alternate dimensions and telekinetic floppy disks?
That's a real thing, by the way. That's
Yeah.
an actual reference. Play this game. There are many more mundane objects imbued with mystical power. Again, that juxtaposition of the mundane versus the fantastic smashed together, like telling somebody to refill a water bottle even though it got tesseracted into another dimension. So yeah, our boy Max also said that bureaucracy is a threat to humanity and our individual freedoms. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what the Hiss has done to all the people inside the Bureau.
Whoa, the thoughts, they just keep coming.
This is what good writing is, by the way. It's not whatever dumb game you like that just had a twist ending for no reason. So yeah, the Hiss, again back to the game, the Hiss has homogenized everyone that works at the Bureau of Control and forced them into fulfilling singular utilitarian functions, which checks out because bureaucracy in its most basic form tends to be more about the means of administration than the people that it uses. So you are just a cog in a machine that is designed to serve people, and then yeah, there's a delicious irony there that your humanity and your individuality is traded away to just work in a machine that's supposed to serve people and their needs. Or more simply, bureaucracy means without regards for the persons.
Now, we don't know much about the Hiss. I forgot that for probably the whole middle chunk.
Rough.
But we do know that they don't have a lot of respect for the people it employs, if you will. It's a grotesque exaggeration of the bureaucracy's disregard for the people needed to make it work. Another example of corruption by the Hiss, while at the same time reflecting that which it is corrupting.
How delectable.
I don't know about this one.
So far, Jesse Faden, in the context of the game, is incorruptible, or the least corruptible. It remains to be seen how far that goes. Play the game if you want to find out. But as the player, you have the opportunity to use corruption in the building to your advantage through the use of objects of power, which is, you know, I'm just now connecting the fact that she becomes the director, the boss, and it's her job to reinforce humanity in an inhuman structure.
Oh my goodness.
Wild.
Objects of power are explicitly mundane objects with one singular function that have been somehow changed by other dimensions. Every object I've encountered previously would have had a very straightforward use. A gun shoots, a phone makes calls, a safe holds its contents, etc.
You know, we could go on about the objects specifically. Control is very fertile ground for thought experiments and takes and philosophical discussions, and there is so much more to get into than what we've touched on here. But it's a good news, we're a YouTube channel and we can upload whatever think pieces whenever we want. It's also a really good and fun game, so please play it, please.
Shoot stuff, throw stuff, fly, whatever you want.
You don't have to care about any of this, just shoot things and fly around.
Stop the video. Go buy Control. Well, okay, finish the video.
Daddy Inside Gaming gets paid first. Then you pay 505 Games and Remedy.
But no matter how many abilities I pick up or challenging boss battles I encounter, I can't help but come back to the building.
Yeah, it's a character just like any other. It's like Dracula's Castle and Symphony of the Night, but even more so because it reinforces all the themes of the game and keeps you thunking. So from the second we entered the doors of the Bureau at the beginning of the game, we've been drawn to the building and especially its design, which is fitting considering the oldest house can only be seen by those who are actively looking for it or perhaps prepared to see it. That gets a little fuzzy.
It's New York.
Yay!
I'm walking here. I love when a setting is so in tune with the messaging of the game, and for every new room I discovered, I felt that same sense of rigidness touched in some way by the corruption of the Hiss, the board, and by the Bureau itself.
Anyway, we're excited to dive further into the game and read more heavily redacted reports. I am so happy there's so many text logs, I love it. And thank you for listening to us talk about our true passion, Concrete. Be sure to follow us for our new endeavor, Inside Concrete. It's gonna be a blast. little concrete-related pun, that's what you gotta do to blow it up, I guess.
For more on Control and deep dives into games, be sure to stay tuned to Inside Gaming, Concrete.
Game's so f***ing smart.
And today we are reviewing Remedy. Nope. No. Today we are reviewing Control, which is a Remedy game. They made Max Payne and Quantum Break and Alan Wake.
Alan Wake.
Who can forget?
Have you guys played other Remedy games?
Got Alan Wake for free on the Epic Game Store. Boo.
That counts?
Yeah, same here.